You said that returning to the UK to work at Gymshark felt like you were playing at home again. How has starting Old Novo affected your home advantage?
It's affected my home advantage. Uh, shall I explain the analogy first? Like,
Yeah, go for it.
I worked in the US for 4 years, and I remember speaking to a fellow Geordie out there, and he put those words into my mouth, and he said, "You won't realize it, but it's like playing an away game." He's a football fan, and he said, "Working in the US is a bit like playing an away game every day." Um, and I didn't notice it at the time. I sort of didn't mean anything to me because I was so used to it. I'd worked in the Netherlands before that, and then moved to Portland, Oregon. But when I moved back to Gymshark in the UK, all of a sudden things felt easier. And it's weird to describe. Like, obviously in the US they speak the same language, and in the Netherlands everybody speaks English in meetings anyway. But he he was right in that the conversation seemed easier. Like, colloquialisms and the language we were using just seemed natural, and it just felt easier, like playing a home game. But you asked me, how has it changed now that I'm at Old Novo? Um, say at Old Novo. Old Novo is just me. Like, there is no like wider Old Novo. I'll tell you one observation. I thought that working for myself by myself would be like lonely, or you sort of be in your own head. But I've ended up working with as many people as I was when I was at Gymshark. Just it doesn't feel like a solo venture anymore. To begin with, when I was thinking about it in my head, it felt like I'd be on my own, like figuring things out. But it couldn't be further from the truth. I've spent all day on calls with people, whether that's like the person that's doing my embroidery, or it's the rep from DHL, the lady at the post office, um, people like yourself, like other people that are trying to do the same thing. I'm spending a lot of time talking to the people about being in a similar situation or working with people to get stuff done, um, which is quite a relief, because I quite enjoy being around people in offices, and it's like more diverse too. You're getting much more broader perspectives and unbiased perspectives, because nobody has to say the right thing because they're inside the same business. So it's not technically home advantage, but like, I've noticed a shift from working for somebody else, working for myself, but it's not in the way that I'd expected. I thought it would I thought it would feel lonely, but it doesn't. Like, entrepreneurs often, like, they talk about, like, it's, I'm still getting used to calling myself an entrepreneur, by the way. But people talk about it being like lonely, and like, and I don't feel lonely at the moment. I feel like there's lots of people that I'm talking to and working with all the time. It's no less a team game than it was before. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad to hear that even though the entrepreneurship journey can be marketed as being lonely, that you're finding your own network, or that you're leaning on your own network, so you're not really finding it as lonely as it may be advertised.
Yeah, it's people talk
Uh,
about like high level positions being lonely, I guess, because within the, you can only speak a certain way to people that you're responsible for. Like, I'm thinking about senior leaders in businesses I've worked for before. They're in lonely positions because they have to act in a certain way as they represent the entire company. They've probably got a very, very tight, close circle. But I don't manage anybody, so I'm just talking about my own opinion with other people. Uh,
mm,
so yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, it's weird. It's weird calling myself an entrepreneur, because I just feel like I'm somebody that's decided to open a business, rather than, again, I'm trying not to use the word entrepreneur, and also not say that I have a brand. Like, I don't really feel like I have a brand yet. I have a business, and I need to figure out that entrepreneurship and that brand side next.
well, what's been clear to me, if you don't want to go down the brand or entrepreneurship route in terms of what you call it, what's been clear to me is that you obsess over product, and it's all about products for you. Even when we speak about Old Novo. So maybe if you go down that route, what is it about the product at Old Novo that you're trying to do? And what kind of gap in the market are you trying to fill? How can you describe what is it that goes into making a great product? Because you seem like you know that, and you're doing that. You're actively doing that.
Yeah, I'm trying. There's lots there. First, the reason I ended up staying at Nike for so long and then moving to Gymshark and doing everything is I'm a product person deep down. Like that's uh it's ended up being my passion. I wasn't particularly into it when I was at school. I never thought I was going to do it, but it's something that I've learned to appreciate and enjoy and love. Um, I find it engaging and interesting. Naturally and easily. I'm not the sort of person that's particularly like diligent or attentive unless it's something that I'm interested in. And if I find that interest, I can go after it. And I think probably most people are like that. What makes great products? The thing that's in my head right now is that is the old like cliche beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Like I think great product means different things to different people. It depends who the audience is. My skill set at Gymshark and Nike before that was primarily around knowing the audience that we're selling to. So, for example, when I was working on NFL, my job was to understand what NFL fans wanted more than anything else. It wasn't outside of that, and what the club wanted and what the league office wanted. Now my mindset is, what does somebody who is a former player that used to love the game, still follows it to some extent, wishes they could still be out there running around, making tackles and hitting rucks, but just as sort of lost the connection to the club somehow or to the game, but still feels like a rugby player deep down. I'm talking about a very, very specific person, and it probably sounds like I'm describing myself, but I think that's true. I recognize that there isn't a brand out there that's doing anything really well for former players. I think there's lots of other gaps, by the way, within rugby, but the one that I'm particularly talking about is former players that still feel like rugby players, but there's nothing for them suitable to wear. Now, there's rugby brands out there, don't get me wrong. Like a great example is Ralph Lauren, where they're not truly a rugby brand, but they do a lot of rugby stuff, and they talk about, you see references to rugby and preppiness, and they certainly make really nice rugby shirts. They're expensive, and I'm not sure everybody wants to wear Ralph Lauren, certainly not all the time, and the preppiness comes through a little bit more than I'd like, and I'm not sure that represents all of rugby. It represents some of rugby, but I don't think every rugby player's preppy or went to private school. So when I say I think I can do a better job, I don't mean a better job than Ralph Lauren, because they're incredible, but I think a better job for the person I'm talking to. It's got to start with the audience that you're trying to sell the product to. Who for? What do they actually want? And then the product sort of takes care of itself then, if you understand that really well. So I was talking to somebody yesterday about the differences between fit over time. And this is like one very specific part of product. But there was a point in time where lots of my friends and my circle would wear tight fitting t-shirts. That was like a thing. It used to be tight fitting t-shirts.
I think we've all been there.
Was like, I'm aging myself. I'm dating myself in terms of age, but the tight fitting t-shirts on nights out were like a thing. And I remember thinking like I was a size large, or even sometimes wearing a size medium t-shirt, and like I wouldn't be seen dead in tight t-shirts. Now everything's oversized. Like knowing those shifts and changes and how it applies to the customer you're talking to is really important. There's a rugby brand that just they're called Rugby Warfare. Rugby Warfare is just effectively closed down, and I still look at their product, and their product is all really tight fitting product because it was linked to the gym. It shows off your muscles, great, but I'm not going to wear a tight fitting rugby top outside of the gym. And I think that's the sort of decision making that goes through your head when you're thinking about what product to make and why. It's endless. I mean, it's like, right, I'm playing around with trying to do some like graphic designs, and the the decision making is endless. Like it's really hard to like constrain yourself and narrow it down to like exactly what you're trying to achieve. And inevitably, the answer is usually who are you actually making it for? What's the actual? If you get that right, you'll be okay.
Yeah, it seems that the focus on the audience with you is coming through in spades here. And just I've got it written down here in Old Novo's about section on the website, and it's very specifically about the audience that you're trying to reach. So for the audience,
Yeah.
Old Novo is for those that lived and breathed the game but found themselves drifting away. They carry rugby in their bones. They may have hung up the boots, but not the values. So more specifically with Old Novo, how are you going about translating these like intangible values, whether it's resilience or grit or, you know, the willingness to or missing hitting a ruck and hitting tackles? How are you translating those values into a tangible design ethos? How are you finding that? You mentioned that you were going into graphic design and exploring with it.
Um, I can give you like really specific examples. Like this hasn't come to
Please.
life yet very well because I'm really starting out. But if you think about so I've created one rugby jersey already. That's uniquely mine. And in in my head, I think it needs to be very minimal in terms of uh, rugby shirts, like the preppy style rugby shirts. If you got, here's a great example: Super Dry. If you look at a rugby shirt and Super Dry, it's got lots of trims and lots of embellishments that are like screaming rugby. So it's like it could be a number font, or it could be twill patches, it could be like a false club crest. That's making it very, very literally a rugby shirt to be like harkening back to an older time. But I don't think the customer I'm talking to wants to wear something that's that detailed, that has that much noise on the product. I think it needs to be stripped back and be a little bit cleaner. So I'm thinking about things like packaging and like copy that can speak to it. So I played with, so this is where my mind went. There's a little bit of copy that I'm starting to just turn out clean. That I found a set of club rules in an archive from the school that I went to. It's a private school in Newcastle called Royal Grammar School. And I went through their archive and looked through some of the stuff they've got that's linked to rugby. And there was a set of club rules from 100 years ago. And one of those rules, among others, like turn up on time and wash your boots, one of them was turn out clean. And I thought, if I can use that piece of copy to reference, it's not screaming rugby, but the backstory links to it. So I think players that grew up playing the game will remember polishing their boots the night before and making sure that all their kit's washed for like PE and weekend games, which shows discipline and attention to detail that you'd expect your teammates to have to do the same thing. I thought that was a nice little touch. It's not actually on the garment anywhere, and I'm trying to work out ways to put that copy into maybe a woven label somewhere or on the packaging itself. But that's where my head goes. Like it's those probably not even secondary, but like tertiary elements that reference the game without screaming it on the product you actually wear. I hope that makes sense as an example.
That makes total sense. It might be because I grew up playing rugby, but I guess I'm the audience that you're trying to speak to, right? Turn out clean, yeah, polishing
Yeah,
boots
yeah,
the night before, or actually sometimes even as soon as you get back after a game or after training or something. Um, yeah, it's making a lot of sense.
yeah. There was there
Go on.
was there was a feeling I remember the mental preparation of, and again, I'm talking about myself. It makes it easy for somebody that's thinking about consumers when I'm talking about I'm talking to people like me. But I remember the feeling of the Friday night it would have been sitting and having like damp boots and getting out. This is a time before synthetic boots, by the way, because I'm 42, so I'm a little bit older than you. But I remember sitting with like wax and like literally physically polishing leather on my, probably it was probably Adidas World Cups or Copa Mundial or something, depending on the weather. But I'd be I'd be wiping them clean, polishing them, and getting that. And as I'm doing that, I'm thinking about the game the next day. And usually that's mental preparation for like, what sort of game do I want to have? Who are we playing against? Is it a big game? Is it an easy game? Do I want to rehearse some of the moves in my mind? That's the feeling of being a rugby player that I want to remind people of. Like, I'm hopefully my customers aren't playing anymore. I guess that's who I'm trying to talk to, but they'll certainly remember that feeling. I think they will.
So this is interesting because I think rugby is in a unique position where when you look at football, for example, there are a lot of brands that are doing something similar in that football space. Where is it why has this not happened with rugby yet?
Great question. But I think about this quite a lot because it matters to me right now. It's like, am I just flogging a dead horse? Is this something that's not coming? And I hope that isn't the case, obviously. But why rugby or why? Sorry, it's happened in football because football's an enormous sport, and in the same way that running and football has huge audiences to talk to, I think the biggest brands in the world recognize the size of the audience and think football's a good bet because everybody loves football. Running's a good bet because everybody can go for a run. We should be talking to those biggest audiences we possibly can. But there will be brands the size of Nike that look at things like rugby and think it's probably not worth us going into that because the audience isn't big enough. And that sounds mad because rugby's an enormous sport, but at the scale that they're in, it needs to be really big for them to go into it. A better example is someone like Canterbury, who Canterbury are a rugby brand and they are on field on some of the best players and teams in the world, but I don't think doing enough off the field, and I don't know why that is. And I'm starting to see Adidas and Canterbury sort of lean into it a little bit more. I have a feeling is that people have been following the model that happened in football, where the business model is essentially replica jerseys. Put the shirt on a team, and kids and fans will buy a version of it for about 70 quid. And that works really well in football, as you well know. And it works. It's been working every single season for the last 20 years. You can release a home and away shirt and people will go out and buy them, even if they're only subtly changed. That's a license to print money. But rugby fans, if you go and walk around in a stadium, that doesn't happen. People aren't wearing replica jerseys. They're wearing warm jackets, quarter zips, hoodies. Like it's just a different. Yes, some people do wear the rugby shirt, but I went to see the Newcastle Red Bulls, as they're now called, and I was actively watching the audience and thinking, like, lots of different ages, and I was seeing people wear maybe 20-year-old rugby shirts from the club. I remember seeing like an Adidas shirt and a Cougar shirt, and these are fans of the game that have gone out and found. I could sort of guess the age of these people and thinking that he probably bought that second hand or vintage, from a vintage store. Like that's an old Adidas shirt from when they won the Premiership. He probably wasn't watching the game then. Certainly not that size. So I think there's a bit of nostalgia. There's a bit of heritage happening in rugby that's there, and it's right for the picking. The reason that I don't think the big brands are doing it is because they rely on huge audiences and efficiencies of scale before they go into stuff like that. And I think rugby is seen as a, I say this, I hope this isn't the case, but I think rugby has been seen as a sport that's dying. But this is where I pause and I think about what happened with golf. And I remember the industry experts talking about golf 10, 15 years ago and saying that it was a dying sport, that it was an old white man's game and you had to be rich and it was expensive to take up and no one was playing golf. I mean, I literally sat in a presentation with, his name's Matt Powell and he works for NPD, which is a big like data organization that tell you about what's happening in trends. And I remember him saying, golf is a dying sport. No one's playing golf anymore. And look at it now. Like I go into Selfridges and I can see 5 brands in one area that are specifically niche golf brands, and they're charging hundreds of dollars for t-shirts and hoodies. And that was a dying sport 10 years ago. And I think the same is going to happen with rugby and also cricket, I should say. I think cricket's also in the same space. I don't know if you saw the Nocta, was it Barbados? I think it was. Maybe I've got it wrong, but Nocta did something with Barbados cricket and made it look
No way.
amazingly cool, like in seconds. Yeah, you should look it up. But
Wow.
there's a couple of cricket fans sent me it, and have you found it? They did something with, I'm sure it was, I might have the wrong country. I apologize, but it was Nocta brand, and overnight, like all of a sudden, I'm looking at cricket in a different way and thinking that's cool now.
Yeah, I'm looking it up now. Drake and Nike Nocta drop cricket inspired collection.
I mean,
I don't know whether
it's not even like just subtly I don't think it's even subtly referencing cricket. There's like literally like guys in pads and whites, and it's like it looks really cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think rugby and cricket are 2 sports that are ready to be commercialized. That sounds really cynical, and when I say commercialized, what I mean is that there's people want to represent the sports that they've played and they love, but they can't be served the same old that they, or served what works for football. They won't work for different sports and different cricketers and rugby players aren't the same as football players. They're just not.
Yeah.
I really don't
I'd
think
agree
that's
with
the
that.
case. Yeah.
Well, the odd thing is that a lot of the time, like football's created its own subculture in fashion, you could say, with blokecore, but rugby is already immersed within fashion culture with rugby jerseys and rugby polos and all of this sort of stuff. So it's interesting that I suppose the rugby powers that be have tried to imitate the football way of doing merch in terms of replica jerseys and things, rather than leaning into what the real estate that they already have within fashion.
Yeah. By the way, there's a good observation. And there's other people trying to do it as well, by the way. I'm one of like many really small brands that are trying to do something cooler. There's one in particular called Modish Rugger. It's female women's rugby brand. Similar position to myself. I just like sort of starting really, really small. They were in the women's only sport store on Regent Street during the World Cup, and I saw the product in there. It's really cool. Like, it's people are recognizing the opportunity and trying to do something with it right now. But I just think that I'm going to make a bold statement now, and this is going to sound really egotistical. I look at brands like, let me give you an example. Satisfy in running have elevated running apparel, or elevated the game in running apparel now, where bigger brands are now copying or referencing that brand, and there's some been really blatant like copies of Satisfy. But what it proves to me is that a much smaller company that's done really well can influence both Nike, which is a huge original running brand. It's tailoring and changing the way that they approach running products. Even that their ACG is being relaunched, and then like there was that famous T-shirt, there was the Moth Tech, etc. That whole incident. But then there's high street fashion like Zara. If I go into Zara Athletics, I look at that. Like there's definitely a Satisfy influence there. I would like to be part of a crowd of small brands that influence bigger rugby brands like Canterbury and Adidas, and like to do stuff a little bit cooler and a little bit different. Like I don't expect to ever be as big as them, but I would like to be able to show that there are cooler rugby players out there. I've got another example of it from a different sport altogether. I remember while I was working at Nike, there was Nike were deciding whether or not to really truly get behind the sport of CrossFit or not. And we had a very similar conversation at Gymshark as well. And I remember someone in particularly is saying it out like, CrossFit's just not really a cool sport. And they said, yeah, these were like what actual words came. It was like, are they really cool and stylish? Like, do we really want to be associated with that sport? And to a certain extent, it was at that point in time, it was probably true. But what's happening? You've got Rad in London. Ben Massey's the founder of a CrossFit footwear brand called Rad, Rally Against Destruction, RAD. They entered as a complete challenger startup brand and made it cool. They didn't try to copy what was already been happening in other brands. They just went out and made something cool. And kudos to Ben for doing that. But that's if rugby players and rugby audiences aren't being served what I think is cool, I'm going to try and do that. And I'm hoping that will be recognized by the audience, but also I'm hoping it will try and change a little bit what's happening with the rugby industry at large as well.
Mm, yeah,
that was my egotistical take. I'm talking 5 years from now, but like I would like to try and do that.
No, that's fine. And even if you think I don't think it's egotistical. It's quite good to hear your mission, and at the very least, you've got a clip that we can use later on. No, I really love that, and as I say, I grew up playing rugby, and I love the fact that you're trying to retain the traditions of rugby, but also make it cool. Do you anticipate there being any friction with trying to balance a new rugby audience that you may have helped create by making rugby cool, but also balancing that with the traditionalists, the people of old, the people who grew up playing rugby, heavy jerseys, this kind of thing? Do you think that there's going to be a bit of friction as you progress with Old Novo and also with the landscape in general?
Yeah, I'm nodding along with a bit of a smile on my face because it's already happening.
Really?
I'm already getting, because I mean, what's a genuine delight and is really like actually super helpful is I'm getting lots of suggestions, advice, tips from the audience that I'm talking to, whether they've actually bought something from me or not, or just people that are observing the videos and saying, "Hey, you should do X, Y, and Z." I'm seeing such a mix of different things. And in my head, there's certain things that I do want to do, and there's certain things that I'm not interested in doing. And a good example is what I don't want Old Novo to be is a memorabilia style. I don't know what the right word is, but like I don't want to just make really good copies of the way jerseys used to look. I don't want to recreate a 50-year-old jersey in modern factories. That's not the idea. The idea is to do something like actual contemporary style and design, just using references. And I keep getting suggestions of, what about this shirt? And do this, and it should have a number on it. And like, look, no, there was a very conscious decision not to have numbers on there. And I don't know if you noticed that you've followed it for a little bit while, but at one point in time, I had no brand mark on it at all because like I want this thing to be really, really clean. And in the end, I made the wrong decision and then ended up having to pay to have the embroidery put on because I thought I should have the brand mark somewhere. So I ended up putting it in the left chest so that it's visible. But yeah, already people are suggesting things that would pull it back towards that traditional look. And I'm trying to stay away from that because I think, it's good practice to have like an audience in mind, but I've actually got a friend of mine who's like a specific, he doesn't know that he's this person, but his name's Gaz, if you ever listen to it. I used to play rugby with him, but he's a rugby player, rugby coach right now that's really into his Yeezys. Like he's still like, he loves the Adidas trainers, been wearing Yeezys for a long time and collects shoes. And he's like quite stylish and he's like just a great character. Everybody loves the guy and has always been a little closer and cooler. And he talked to me about the debate that his club is having about what to wear after a game. And the old guard are like, no, you've got to wear a shirt and a club tie, and you should have your chinos on and a pair of shoes. And he talks about the young players that are coming through. They're like, why would I want to wear jeans? I want to wear maybe an oversized t-shirt or a hoodie. And he's like, he talked to me about where he sits, and he's my age, and he said, I think I'm more in favor with what the young guys are saying. Like, there's got to be a way to make things a little bit more wearable and cooler. I don't want to look like private school, university rugby players do after a game. I want to look fashionable and cool. But I'm still a rugby player. But and then when I think about these decisions, I think about Gaz and think about what would Gaz do in this situation. What would he prefer to wear? I guess you could call him my muse, but he's also got blonde hair. But,
There you go.
Maybe I've taken it too far.
Shout out to Gaz, the muse.
Yeah.
So I think there were a few elements there when you're saying that it was your decision to not put numbers on jerseys, and your decision because you didn't want it this way, you didn't want it that way. Can you go a little bit more into what it is that's dictating what it is that you want versus don't want? Is it your own personal preference, or is it rooted in the current audience? Is it rooted in trying to be contemporary, trying to be different, trying to disrupt a bunch of them all together? What is it that you're trying to keep front of mind as much as there's Gaz? What is it that you're trying to keep front of mind when making these decisions?
I think when you said making it a little bit different, I think that's probably the main thing. When I say making something contemporary, and there's so many different elements you could play with here, right? So the rugby, so in the RG jersey, there's 2 or 3 things that are a little bit different. It's very familiar in that it's a rugby jersey and people recognize that, but the stripe pattern is disrupted from the norm. Like, normally it's a repeat, but we broke that tradition by having one single red line instead of like red, black, red, black, red, black, or red, black, white, red, black, white. And that was different and deliberate. And also the color choice. Like, whenever I see in high street fashion or online, it's like, we've got a rugby polo or a rugby jersey. It's just a top with a white collar on it, a white tulle collar. It's not really a rugby jersey. So I like the idea of flipping that to black because it just made the whole thing look different and new and a little bit more moving on. So not different for different sake, but trying to just break the assumed norm a little bit. And I'm not trying to be like revolutionary here, just like small things. I mean, oh, that's different. That's a little, it's moved the jersey on a little bit. Now, another thing you might do is it could be fit. It could be that, like a rugby jersey could be oversized, whereas you would have never really worn a true oversized, like off the shoulder in a on field. That's on field now is always like pretty tight and has been for a long time, 20 odd years. It could be that instead of a buttoned placket, we use a zip as a quarter zip. It's still like just to disrupt something without moving everything away from the original intent of a rugby jersey. It's like it's an interesting exercise to figure out what are the essential items to make a rugby, and how many of them can you move before it's not a rugby jersey anymore. And I like playing around with that idea.
So off the top of your head, I mean, you've been working on this with Old Novo. What are those essential elements, and which elements can be manipulated?
Well, these are the things that I'm seeing in the marketplace being manipulated. So I see cut and sew stripe patterns being done. There's a as we're talking about, there's an image of a rail of rugby jerseys in inverted commas in Zara right now, and I've been sent it twice from different people. And I saw it myself when I walked through. And there's those are rugby jerseys, but they're big, bold, like 3-inch stripes, but they're cut and sew, right? They're not, and the fabrication is a brushed back fleece. So it speaks to rugby in that it's stripe pattern and it's repeat, but they've broken that tradition of it being a yarn dyed stripe, and it has a white collar. But it's oversized, and I think they're nice jerseys. But to me, it's stripe patterns is a fundamental, is essential. I think stripe patterns, it could be quarters, but I think that I think stripes are more. I don't know what the right word is. More iconic. Stripe patterns are probably more iconic as a thing that's rugby. The white placket, the white twill collar with a placket, I think is even to the detail of is it covering the buttons or not? I think if it's not covering the button, it starts to look a bit more like a polo. But if the placket covers the buttons and it's the same pattern, I think that makes it a little bit more rugby. But usually with a bright white crisp white twill collar. Um, I think with those two things, you could break all the other rules and still people would see it and go, "That's a rugby jersey." Like I've seen a Japanese brand. I'm going to forget the name of the brand now, but they made a merino wool, really like lightweight, very fine denier merino wool. It's really a merino long sleeve top, and it doesn't have a stripe pattern. It's just a line down the middle. So it's like sort of that blocking of a stripe. It's a reference to a stripe, even though it's just like essentially two stripes, one either side. And then and it's a really nice oversized fit, and a little the white collar just makes it, grounds it as being a rugby jersey. Really, it's not. It's not. It's a merino long sleeve, but they call it a rugby jersey, and I'm like, yeah, you immediately recognize it.
Mm.
So there's so much that can be played with. I would love to play around with different materials and see how far you can go and have things still be a rugby jersey. Did you see Barber just did a collab with Levi's?
I haven't seen it. No, see if I can find it.
It's only in the last couple of weeks, but there's like I'm sure you'll appreciate this. The two have this workwear background. And you've got two very different styles of workwear. But two big brands, and I love that Barber, which is from the Northeast, is working with an enormous company like Levi's. But there's one jacket in particular where they've taken the silhouette, which is known as being Barber's silhouette, and they've used Levi's denim to recreate the B-Dale jacket. So it's like the silhouette, and if you drew a black and white image of it, just the cards, you'd go, that's a B-Dale jacket. It's clearly a B-Dale jacket, but it's been veneered with Levi's indigo denim. And I love that exercise. That's just me being a product nerd. Like I want to buy it just because of the execution of take two brands and merge them. What does that look like? And it made me think, like, what would Old Novo times Barber look like? Like you'd take that waxed cotton, but you would still need to have a collar that makes it a rugby jersey. You still need a white twill collar, but another exercise, like what would Carhartt times Old Novo look like?
Mm.
You're thinking immediately of a color and duck cloth, and probably a darker corduroy collar, like those things that in playing with those two things. That's something that I never appreciated when I was younger. But after spending 20 years working in sportswear, those things now I look at it and just go, I'm like, well done, I love it. Even if sometimes they're a little bit obvious. Like I just think most people don't look at product the same way as you do once you start working inside of the industry.
Yeah, I've just seen the jacket actually, and it is very, very clean. I kind of want to
Yeah.
get it as well. You
That's
sold
cool.
it.
It's also a great price. Like I couldn't believe, like
Yeah.
it's not. I mean, it's an expensive jacket. Don't get me wrong, and it will last you a lifetime. But you kind of think like that they could have charged twice as much for that. Really do think they could have, and they haven't. But
Well, it's done well. The double XL sold out right now,
Yeah.
so it's doing okay.
Yeah.
On that note, who would be your dream collaboration with Old Novo? If you had to pick one, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Should there's a guy. The brand is called Front Office. And his name's Ken Sakata. He is I think you and I have talked about him before. I would just love to see how he would interpret a rugby jersey. It's not necessarily the collab exercise. I would just love to say, you're in charge. Where would you go with this? Because just as somebody that's like an inspiration for me to like look on the way that he talks about product, the level that he goes to when he storytells around the history behind his designs is I genuinely can't think of anyone that's better. I think he's world class in storytelling, and just every time he puts out a 1 minute clip on either Substack or YouTube, or whatever, I watch every single one of them because he's just so good. I would love to hand him the reins and go, can you interpret a rugby jersey? Just go do what you want. I would love to see what that looks like. If it was all branded Old Novo or not, I'd probably want to buy it because I think the guy's incredible. And he's not trained in a typical sense. The guy's is a former surgeon. In fact, I think he actually still is a surgeon in Australia, but he his business has taken off. But it's a fascinating story if you haven't heard of the guy. But he's the one that jumps to mind. I mean, there's um, big brand names that I'd love to see, like I the the ones that are already doing rugby really well would be cool. But I feel like like Rowing Blazers
Hmm.
is a brand like I'd love to see Old Novo be that level of execution one day. I would miles away from it now, but I do think that I'd love to see. That's the sort of the standard that I'm trying to hold myself to. I'll put it that way. Um, so, in a sense, being able to be on a par with someone like that, to be able to do a collaboration with a brand like Rowing Blazers, that would be that's an ambition for sure.
Well, Ken or Ryan Blazers, if you're listening, you've got a suitor just here. Um,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, with everything that you've said, I'm wondering whether rugby's shot itself in the foot. I mean, the sport probably has in more ways than one, but in terms of merch and kits in general, because it seems like they had the kits right in the 90s and the early noughties, and it's almost geared too much towards performance, to use like a catch-all term.
Has.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, what do you think of that? As someone who's worked in, sportswear for a while, as a rugby fan, as founder of Old Novo, like what do you think of that? And do you think it could boomerang back around, or
I
is it
think it
too
will.
far gone?
I really think it will. The seeds are there. Like there's some green shoots already happening. And if you haven't already seen, Adidas and Nike are starting to do some. Adidas just released a French rugby retro. I'm going to call it a retro, and it's referencing long sleeve jerseys from probably the 90s, and Anton Dupont's wearing it in the advert. So that it's coming and it's happening, but they're not going to put that on field because Adidas, Nike, whoever else, they are innovators and they're trying to make product lighter, stronger, faster. That's their DNA. That's not going to change. I think on field will always stay that way. But yeah, there's the success of football and soccer globally and that model working has to be part of the decision making to get teams wearing polyester and skin tight. Like one of my favorite jerseys of all time is the 2003 England rugby kit. When England and France, it's probably one of the reasons I ended up wanting to work for Nike in the first place, or even working in Apparel. So it's something I think about quite a bit. If you already know the story, bear with me, but I'm going to tell it anyway.
It's all good.
When Jason Robinson, he came across from rugby league, electric player, like people couldn't tackle the guy. Apparently, this is like the legend is that I say it's a legend. Clive Woodward puts it in his book. There's a book called Clive Woodward wrote called Winning, and in there he specifically talks about working with Nike and the designers and developers on finding a way to make the jersey tighter so that it was harder for Jason Robinson to be tackled. They were analyzing play and seeing that he was getting scragged by like long, loose bits of garment and saying, well, let's just make it tighter and see what happens. Now, I've since learned from the people inside of Nike that were there at the time that wasn't quite the case, but the story stuck with me. They revolutionized the look and the feel of rugby overnight. And I mean overnight. Usually it's a very, very slow evolution of rugby jerseys over time. But this was different. This was jerseys were starting to get a little tighter, but they were still cotton hand. They still felt like cotton.
Mhm.
And then like that, it was skin tight jerseys. Like they looked like they were painted on. And England and France both came out of the World Cup and wore these jerseys. And as a kid watching that, I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I thought it was so amazing. And then obviously England went on and won the World Cup, and South Africa, France, and England all had these skin tight jerseys. But that led to every other brand doing the same thing. It was an arms race of how tight and how light can we make the jerseys, and every brand pendulum swung towards that. And of course, the benefit of the product being polyester and sweat wicking and whatnot is you can very cheaply and quickly make replica jerseys. But big shift, right? You lost one of those those essential parts of a rugby jersey, which was the collar. So it had a quite a high neckline, but it didn't have a flappy collar. It was now essentially a really tight t-shirt or a crew neck instead of what I would call a rugby jersey. But they gave every other brand license to remove the collars, and it wasn't until I can't remember the year, but it was the England centenary kit. Again, Nike sort of leading the way. They recognized that every jersey was tight and tight fitting, and they modernized the collar. So it was a false faux collar with no real buttons, but it looked like there was one. And they put an actual foldable collar there and made sure it was pinned down. And this is when the Armitage brothers were playing. Haskell was in the team at that point in time, but it was a off-white classic replica of the England Rose. That was the first time I'd seen a rugby brand bring back the collar. And slowly but surely, I'm seeing rugby brands start to put those back in. We did it when I was at Nike with Argentina. We put a collar on the Argentina jersey. The All Blacks now have a collar back on theirs. Macron have put a collar on the Scotland jersey this year. Like it's starting to come back. It's not going to be an overnight shift back to nostalgia, but jerseys are getting cleaner. They are traditional stripe patterns instead of bold graphics. Are starting to reappear. Like the Scotland Heritage jersey, it's a really, really nice jersey by Macron. They're out of Italy. Just solid blue, really nice color blue. Got that nailed down. Not too many logos on there. Logo placements perfect. Colors classic. Whereas you look at a team like I use the Red Bulls. Their yellow away kit has loads of patterns and print all over it. It's quite. It feels more like a football kit than a rugby kit.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we'll go next. We'll see. You asked a long answer to a much shorter question, but you'd asked me about have they shot themselves in the foot? I think rugby brands tried to follow what worked really well with Nike to begin with, and went too far, too quickly, where everything was skin tight and lightweight polyester. They shot themselves in the foot there because people don't want to wear that off the field in rugby. There is no replica business in rugby jerseys because of that reason. In fact, you're more likely to see, as I said, you're more likely to see someone wearing an old cotton version of a jersey off the field than you would do on. That's why Adidas and Canterbury are selling retro styles now, and probably in better units than they are of the actual jerseys. British Lions is a good example. How many actual jerseys do they sell versus the retro version? I'd love to know that. I'd imagine that you're seeing more people buy now the retro long sleeve that's cotton because it's just more wearable, much more in keeping with what people are actually wearing off the field.
Yeah. No, that was a that was a great answer for what it's worth to a very short question. There was also that moment, if you talk about the traditional style, like heavier jerseys with the collars, and then the jerseys that we've got now, there was a moment where, especially in France, the jerseys almost imitated F1, where it just seemed like there were logos all over. Like I'm thinking about Stade Francais, and there would be logos everywhere. Yeah, sponsorship. It would just be all over it. And I remember thinking, maybe it was just because it was Stade Francais and it was a pink jersey. I remember seeing them at the Stoop, and I thought that's a really cool jersey. In the same way that I think an F1 jacket is great, but I wouldn't wear it to the pub. I'm a walking billboard. But I wonder whether there's any scope for. I mean, I'm a graphic designer, right? So I love logos, but I'm also a rugby traditionalist, I'd say. I wonder whether there's any scope for that to come back or to have a hybrid.
So with the insight in the business of rugby is that obviously the sport isn't particularly profitable in France or in the UK. So those sponsorship deals are incredibly important. So having the logo all over multiple logos all over the jerseys is a practical way for the teams to make money, right? Self-explanatory. But I think what might be really interesting is to see so Newcastle Red Bulls is the exercise at Newcastle Red Bulls doesn't seem to be about making money. It seems to be more about brand visibility for Red Bull in a big sport. Now, it'll be interesting to see whether they have multiple logos on there. They don't need, like, if they own the club, they don't need to necessarily add lots of other brands to the jersey. And I'd like to see Newcastle Red Bulls have much fewer. Like it'd be rare to see a rugby jersey with one sponsor and that'd be it. Like you've got the manufacturer's logo, let's say it's Adidas, Nike, someone big, and Red Bull across the front, and that's it. That would look really, really clean compared to all the other teams in France and in the Premiership. So that'll be an interesting exercise. But yeah, Stade Francais is probably one of the coolest. That era where they wore like more and more wild designs on field was its peak of like peak football, I'd say, where it was like, how nuts can we make this jersey and people still buy it? And it still had that red thread of having pink from the club identity. But those jerseys, there's a period of time where those jerseys were incredible. And as a non-Stade Francais fan, I would still want to buy the jersey. And I think that's the beauty. If you can figure out how to do that to make something really, really cool and unique, that people that don't support the team will still want to buy it. That's when you're really onto something. And I've got examples in my mind of as a kid, like bought a Brazil football jersey. I think there was Auckland Blues and Fiji Sevens. Like these are all like iconic football or rugby jersey designs that are in my head that I wanted to wear because of the way the team played and because they just looked so cool in their own right. And that you talked about football bloke core. That's what's happening right now. Nail the design and make a cool design, and you can wear it in the street.
So I like the way that you put that, as there's almost two parts for it. There's the mythology and the story around the product, but also how the product itself looks, and then maybe how the team performs as like a side note to that. If you had to weight each of those in terms of how important product is in sportswear, if we just go with the first two, so you've got
Yeah.
the story and the mythology around it. When we were talking about front office, you mentioned that Ken is a master storyteller. So how
Yeah.
much of it is story versus pure aesthetic appeal?
You reminded me of a conversation I had about what makes a great rugby jersey a great rugby jersey. And it's almost like there's different criteria, and like those are two of the criteria. Like one of them is, does the team perform well? Like you don't necessarily have to win. So I keep talking about Newcastle references, but I'm a Geordie, so I'm going to.
No, please crack on.
So in the mid '90s, when Alan Shearer was the most expensive player in the world, and he signed for Kevin Keegan, and there was a specific era of football jerseys that Adidas brought to Newcastle, and they are still seen as being like the gold standard of football jerseys in the Northeast. And it was a combination of both what you described. They were Adidas branded, which made a difference. So it made immediately whatever they put on there, because it was Adidas branded, feels like a cooler jersey. They were a really strong performing team. They didn't win anything famously, but they were performing in a way and playing like, I don't know, like an attractive, engaging style of play that everyone could appreciate. They were known as the entertainers, if you remember this or not, but they played lovely football to watch, and it was great to be a fan growing up there. So those two things combined, of having really well done designs and success on field, gold standard. Question is, like, could you put a really, really ugly jersey on field and have them win, and people like that's a collector's edition? And that I wasn't involved in this conversation, but it's one I've heard. His name's Duncan Wood. He's the guy behind Bum for Vintage, and he was asked the question about what makes a great jersey. And what he sees in collectors is sometimes really, really ugly jerseys are the collectible. Like he named some of the really, really ugly ones. Like there was one in particular. It was like, I think it's a Canadian jersey, and it's either red or white with lots of stars, and it's pretty garish and hard to look at, but it's one of the most sought after jerseys because it's so ugly. And I think there's statements like that are really interesting. If you go to Rugby Journal, which is a publication. They're print, but you can get some of their articles online. Sometimes they have a page that talks about it's called Rugby Stories, and they talk about Jersey Stories, I think it's called, and they talk about some famous jerseys through time. It's an interesting exercise to look at them all, and that Canada one's on there. And there's some really beautiful looking ones that are iconic, and they talk about why these are really cool. One that's in my memory at the moment is a London Irish shirt that's looks like a current Ireland jersey. It's that emerald green with a white collar, but it has this brilliant little silhouette of a Guinness pint right in the middle. And there's a particular year where they wore this, and it's just that, and it has triangle number on the back and a Guinness pint on the front. And I was like, that is just what. Other than that pint of Guinness, it's exactly like every other green emerald jersey. That one pint of Guinness in the middle makes it look so good. It doesn't say Guinness; it's just the silhouette of a pint with a white head on it. Um, But yeah,
So is
if you want to look at some really cool designs, go check out Jersey Stories on Rugby Journal. It's brilliant, and they do that storytelling pretty well and talk about those designs.
so how do you use that knowledge and appropriate it almost for Old Novo? Because you haven't got a team that's performing in the same way as a rugby team. So how is it that you're going about creating this mythology, this story? How is it that you're going about the storytelling um, to nail that part? Because all the product looks beautiful, but how are you nailing the storytelling part as well?
The vision for me is to I'm trying to take this arc from like being really personal to being much more broad. And at the moment, the personal story is like the first few jerseys are going to be around my school. Me as a player in the school that I play for, where I learned to play rugby, was forced to play rugby and grew to love the game. So you can expect rugby jerseys that are black, red, and white in some sort of combination, and that arc will lead to a point where it starts to blow up to being more northeast. So, I'm thinking, this is because I'm a product manager at heart. I'm thinking about like the next 2-3 years. That will then start to move broader to local club rugby in the northeast, of which there's some like incredible Jersey DNA to be talked about as well, which is uniquely northeast. And then I'd like to start to think about doing broader stuff like international teams. And I want to connect really well with the northeast and people that play rugby in the northeast. And I think I can have success there because that's where I'm from and I play rugby, and that's where I'm trying to emerge from. So yeah, the arc will start as tell the story about school and the rugby that I learned, and then maybe go on to the clubs that I played for, and interpret them, not copy. I want to honor honor the designs and honor the DNA of those jerseys, and then start to get a little bit broader. Because one thing's sure, I can't just stay talking about RGS Newcastle for the next 5-10 years. I need to go broader. So, yeah, personal, school, club, international. That would be where I'd like to sort of take that journey.
Very good. And do you think you'd expand into other types of products as well, or are you going to stay very firmly rooted in the rugby jersey, as it were?
There's a mission deep down. So like this sound, I don't have any right to own the rugby jersey at all, but I want to try and take it back from fashion. Like there's Ralph Lauren is not a rugby brand, but has stolen it and is seen as like the brand that makes the rugby jerseys. And I feel like a rugby brand should own the rugby jersey. So I would like to try and also rowing blazers. I mentioned them earlier. It's a guy who used to play. He used to row for. I think he rowed for the US team. But he wrote a story. He wrote a book. Literally, he wrote the book about rowing blazers, and that turned into a brand that sells a lot of rugby jerseys now.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I feel like that should be owned by a rugby brand. I don't have any rights to be the person that does that, but I'm going to give it a go. So yeah, the rugby jersey is something that will be like pinned up as the hero piece, the anchor for everything else that goes there. But I know that not everyone's going to wear a rugby jersey every time. Like there's probably nobody else. Hopefully, nobody else on the planet talking about rugby jerseys as much as I am at the moment. And I'm not wearing one right now. I'm wearing a t-shirt and a hoodie. So you can expect caps, t-shirts, hoodies, that sort of thing around it. But the anchor will always be some sort of reference to rugby jerseys.
I I really love that mission. I've just written down like recapturing rugby from fashion. Probably a little bit wordy at the minute, but
Yeah.
yeah,
You,
that's super
like,
compelling.
you used the word when we were talking earlier. You said that fashion brands have appropriated rugby jerseys. And I think, and it's like, I want to do the opposite of that. I don't know how to put it into like a really tight phrase, but I want to take the rugby jersey back to an actual rugby brand.
Yeah.
Because the rugby brands at the moment right now are on-field performance brands. Canterbury doesn't. It's starting to change. I have to be really careful about what I say because I think Canterbury are very, very good at what they do. They're the best at it, but they're still very much an on-field brand. And I give you another example. Castor sponsored the England team right now. It's like there's so much they could be doing off the field for rugby players, but at the moment it looks like another football jersey.
Mm.
Um,
So if we've spoken about your mission, your crusade almost to do the opposite of appropriate rugby from fashion. Do you see the wave from the fashion industry in terms of like appropriating sport? I mean, you mentioned Nocta earlier with cricket. Do you see that slowing down anytime soon, or do you think it's going to get more intense?
I don't. I mean, do you? I think it's like the two are so intertwined now.
I've got a my if you let me really quickly,
Yeah,
my
please.
thought of it is that I think fashion brands are getting found out by the consumer a lot of the time for not
Right.
actually providing clothing or product that is worth the money that it's being sold for. And the rise of fake goods, probably from like China or the Far East or wherever, really, and the similarity in quality between the official and the fake, it's so close that people are just going for the cheaper option now, and as we should. So now fashion brands are having to lean more into that storytelling element that we were talking earlier. If the products are quite similar, and if there's one story or one industry that contains a bunch of stories that really resonate to the core of people, especially in the UK. It's sport. So no wonder there's all these collaborations coming about with sports teams, franchises, leagues, etc. Because the fashion brands, in my opinion, need them to stay afloat. That's my hot take, and that's my hot take of the day.
Yeah, because we're quite like, as I said, I'm a little bit older. We forget to think like much longer term. Like if you the Premiership football hasn't been professional and making like it hasn't always been like hundreds of millions of dollars contracts, and it hasn't always been that way. There was a moment in time where football was still amateur, and it wasn't that long ago. I can remember rugby being amateur, and it still doesn't make people still don't make that much money. And your heroes in sport were still like working class people that had other jobs, and that doesn't fit and feel like what luxury high-end fashion brands were about. As if you think like 40, 50 years ago, that wasn't what they were. It was like Jane Birkin. It was like models and actresses and people that were seen as like true celebrities, superstars. And people's definitions of heroes have changed now. Like people look to football players, rugby players right now as heroes on field, and they so that's being turned upside down. I guess is probably what I'm trying to get at. It used to be like the ultra elite were what people would aspire to be, and it seems like people now appreciate working class heroes more now, and people that are in sports. And what's great is you can go and carve out a career in professional sport now and get a good wage, whereas you didn't used to be able to do that. And that's a relatively new phenomenon, isn't it? It's not that. I mean, if you're only 20 years old, you probably don't recognize that. But there was a time where sport wasn't a professional. It wasn't a profession. It wasn't like I'm going to be a footballer, mum, dad. It was like, but what's your actual job going to be? Are you going to be a lawyer, dentist, whatever? And I think that's probably why when you're trying to like luxury brands are all about selling aspiration, aren't they?
Hmm.
They're selling a lifestyle, and I think that's like I'm I'm football and hopefully rugby are part of that aspirational lifestyle.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't actually thought about that kind of nuance before, so it's not as
Here is
dramatic
it,
potentially as I may have made it
yeah,
sound.
yeah. It's but he, yeah. I guess what I'm saying is I think the definition of aspirational has completely changed.
Yeah.
It's not movie stars and film stars and royalty and things like that anymore, and it's definitely changed now. And in the last 20 years, that's been flipped on its head, I think.
So with Old Novo, then I'm interested in how you're balancing the aspirational lifestyle with what is a a uh, a fashion brand, but for like rugby traditionalists. It's still rooted in that kind of rugby community. How and community and aspiration almost seem like they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. Have you found that there's a tension there at all?
Um, haven't really thought about it yet, but yeah, it's had a great conversation with Brad from Hook and Flanker yesterday, and he was talking about his ambition to be like the grassroots hero, and he was really
Hmm.
specific about. I mean, it's in his brand name, Hook and Flanker. Like he's like specifically he wants to appeal to hookers and flankers that play rugby.
Hmm.
He's like there's a certain, and you understand this if you play rugby, like there's a certain mentality of the type of person that wants to be a hooker or a flanker. Like it's not a flashy winger or a 9 or a 10. It's somebody that's like likes to put their head in places most people don't and would like to tackle and likes like rucking and mauling and that sort of thing. So it's like he's like
Rugby
that's who.
Norse.
Yeah, he was like well like physical and maybe a little bit aggressive and just like hard working. He's like these are the things that he wants to be the grassroots brand that stands for those people. And I was like, you like that's a really specific niche. He's like, that's who I'm going after. Whereas like if you flip it and say like Nike football is about, you think of Cristiano Ronaldo, you think of skills and flair and bright colors and speed. He's like, that's not who I want to go after. So like I had that call with Brad yesterday. And I was like, I need to get really, really tight on um, going back to my conversation about gas, thinking like, what it's a it's somebody that still feels like a rugby player,
Hmm.
but and I say it doesn't feel like there's anything for that rugby player now. Like Gaz or myself doesn't want to wear a chino pants and a club tie to go to the pub afterwards. Like I want to
Yeah.
still look contemporary and cool. And how do you do that as a rugby brand? There's a brand called Earl's Collection, and I think he's in New Zealand. I don't know if you know, but he's a former rugby league player. Now he doesn't specifically talk about rugby specifically that much, but he definitely talks about sport. And if you look at his styling and his products, he's a bit like it's very similar to the sort of represent Cole Buxton sort of style you see in the UK. He's done a really, really good job of making some styles look really cool and contemporary in streetwear fashion. Um, I would like that's sort of where I'd like to see myself going, but just keeping it retaining the rugby element to it. Whereas he's playing with basketball and rugby league and lots of other sports in there. I think he's just more sporting in general. But
Hmm.
yeah, no, again, somebody else I'd look up to. You asked me about collaborations. I think he'd also be someone that I'd love to see myself on that sort of level at some point.
Awesome. Um, Something that I suppose is quite topical right now is also with women's rugby,
Yeah.
and the women's Premiership was only founded 8 years ago. It's still semi-professional as far as I'm aware, but women's rugby is really, really taking off. Um, how if we talk about the rugby fashion industry in general, how do you see that moving forward? Because we don't necessarily have the tradition of rugby jerseys, even though rugby jerseys are worn by anyone and everyone. I think Hailey Bieber was seen wearing it recently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's not necessarily. it's not disjointed by gender in terms of the rugby jersey, but in terms of having that tradition and maybe having product for women for the women's game. How do you see that developing? Because it's still very, very new.
It is. And it's way more exciting than men's at the moment.
Yeah,
There's so
for
much
sure.
happening. Huge, great growth, much more global. Got some absolute superstars that are incredibly open, transparent about who they are as people, as players, as like influencers, as you like. I think they really, really exciting. The first thing that jumps to my mind um, is somebody who will remain nameless suggested that I should get into women's rugby. Like, you should do women's, and I was like, hell no. Like that doesn't that's not a knock on women's rugby. It's because as a 42-year-old man, I'm not going to pretend to try and know what's best for women's rugby. Like, if people want to wear my product, great. Of course, I wouldn't exclude anybody, but that's not who I'm. That's not my muse. It's not who I'm going after. But um, I listened to a podcast the other day about a prediction, which I have to say I hadn't thought of, but might not be wrong, was the fact that women's rugby might end up being the bigger game than men's rugby.
Oh wow.
And if you pause and think about that for a little while, and you think about, like, in terms of the actual trajectories, if you just plot the lines and forecast forward, that's the direction it's headed. It's a long way off actually happening in terms of like absolute numbers if you just take a stab right now, but one's growing fast and one's flat at best. And I think that would be really interesting to see female brands be created out of women's rugby that does something that's for them, that's completely different. And you're talking about that tension between tradition and the modern, the contemporary. There are effectively no rules. They can do what they want.
Mm.
Women's rugby's been played for a long time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have that the multiple decades of commercial history that's trying to be redone there, and it can be whatever it wants to be. But I would like to see female rugby players go and take hold of that. I forget the lady's name right now. I need to try and get better at this sort of thing. But she's the creative director at Saracens for the club in its entirety, and she's a former. No, I think she's either a former or current player in the women's Saracens team. And she's one of the creatives behind their whole rebrand. And I think about people like that as being, is when I was doing some research for who I thought would be a great creative director, like for Old Novo. And I discovered her name there, and I thought, oh, this is great. Like, you got somebody in women's rugby that's actually responsible for the entire club, and not just the men, not just women's, but men's. I think people like that taking the reins, and the founder of Modest Rugger. There's as many female social media influencers, I don't know the right phrases, but like in the UK right now, making great content about the sport as there are men. It tends to be that the male influencers are all ex-players, whereas the way, and that's not a bad thing. It makes sense. It does, but it seems to be in the women's game, you've got non-players have the confidence to be able, non-pros or non-ex-pros have the ability to go and say, actually, we can talk about the game too and do it just as good, and create great content. So yeah, it's fascinating. I'm personally trying to stay out of it, because I don't think what you and I both know is authenticity sells, and that's the thing that's worked right now. And it would be foolish of me to do anything but try to be myself and to sell product for someone like me. That's my game right now. But in this, I was talking about cricket earlier. Cricket is another sport that I look at and go, what I'm saying should happen, what I've seen happen with golf, that I'm trying to do with rugby, could be done with cricket. But I never played the game, didn't watch it. I'm choosing not to go anywhere near that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Flo Williams, I've just done a quick Google,
That's
is
the
the
one.
creative director.
Yeah.
I think it's great that clubs are getting creative, or have creative directors now, because the creative landscape is massive and sport is very closely tied to that. So
I think Flo has an agency. Is that right? Again, I don't know. I think she was part of an agency, and then she's, yeah, or maybe
Have a quick
again,
look
I
at.
was, yeah, I did a quick bit of research when I was doing for a video that I was doing. In the end, I didn't use it, but I can, yeah,
Yeah,
she met,
uh, going through all kinds of articles here. We'll
yeah,
talk about it after.
yeah,
But
but yeah, it's great. Like, and it shouldn't, and it doesn't surprise me. But what I'm saying, I'm hoping that there's um new perspectives
yeah,
coming from the women's game that eventually the men's game will start to adopt. And the two might be very different. Like Jim Hamilton talks about there was a podcast with Sam Warburton, and Jim and Sam talk about the men's game needing to play into the, so what he loves is like the physical nature and the gladiatorial aspect of rugby, and how it's not for everyone and it's really tough. And I thought that's what appeals to me, and I'm going, yeah, that's right. And then, but it doesn't seem to be that that's what's working for the women's game, even though it's as gladiatorial and as physical and confrontational. But that's not how the players are approaching it, and they're having much more success. So
yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. We'll see how it plays out. I don't have the answer right now, to be honest with you.
No, it's something to think about. It is one of those things where, fortunately, unfortunately, I think we're just going to need to see how it plays out and take elements from different bits as and when is appropriate. I'd agree with you. I think the two games are different. And one more hot take. My hot take is that I think there can be a lot more overlap between the men's game and the women's game. I think there could be a world where men and women can play on the pitch together, which always gets like shocked reactions. But you mentioned golf a few times. If you want to learn golf, you should watch a women's golf swing. And across
Right.
sports, women's technique tends to be a lot better. So when you've got the more, for want of a better phrase, technical positions in rugby, maybe they'd just be dominated more so by women. And who knows? Like, I'm just saying, like,
Interesting.
it's not been done yet, so maybe like we shouldn't dismiss it before it's been done. But
Well,
I do always
they were,
get shock from that.
yeah, yeah. It's similar, but this is feasible. Like today, like as of next week, you could start doing this. The combined score, the aggregate score of the men's and women's games happening at the same time. So let's say England plays France in both men's and women's, and you take the aggregate score of both, and you give the trophy to the team that has the best combined score. So they play two separate games. Say who's the winner for the nation at the same time. That was suggested recently on a podcast. So I was like, that's brilliant, because you could do
That
that
is
right
brilliant.
now. You could just literally set up the league and go, just out of interest, by the way. And I think it was between Ollie from the Rugby Knows and the founder or creator of the Rayburn Shield. Have you heard of this concept? You should look
No.
at it. But basically, the Rayburn Shield and the Utrecht Shield are the men's and women's respective lineal world titles. And what he's done is he's gone back to the very first game in both of those international histories and recorded who won each game, and its winner stays on. And England happened to be the current holders of the Rayburn Shield. They've won the last 8 games in a row, and I can't remember who they beat to retain it. But basically, you can lose it in any particular game. My point is, on that podcast where we're talking about it, he talked about the idea of combining the two and combining scores. I think that's really smart. But also, the Rayburn Shield didn't exist. It's a thing that he's created to add more dimension and more storytelling to a sport. And I think that combination of men's and women's results could actually be really interesting. Probably in a national level first, because if you think about the Six Nations, they're probably happening at the same time. Like, how hard would it be for the Six Nations to just publish a table that says, "Oh, and by the way, on aggregate, this team actually won"?
Yeah, I mean, but it's also the kind of thing where even if the Six Nations didn't do that, and even if none of the official nations accounts did that,
You could,
there's
or I could.
someone. Yeah. This is an idea. We should do that. Let's go viral.
100%. Yeah.
So
That's got your
one of
brain
the
ticking now. You're thinking
it
about
has thinking like, how
yeah,
can we make this happen? We've got enough time before the Six Nations starts to do this.
yeah.
Um, what I was going to ask is, so as someone who has been involved in products at the highest level, for anyone listening who wants to get involved, or anyone who is like me who also wants to kind of get involved in maybe making their own product, do you have any steps or any advice to give on how what goes in? I know we've spoken about what goes into making a great product, but do you have you like systemized it in any kind of way? In what kind of questions you need to ask yourself?
God, yeah, it feels like it's second nature to me now, but I'm scribbling here because there's loads of things going off in my head. First thing, anyone can do it. I don't have any professional training at all in product creation. I learned on the job from people, just learning from people around me. Like I played rugby, and my um, degree was in sports psychology because I wanted something that would help me be a better rugby player. Had nothing to do with, and then I worked for Nike for a little while before I actually stepped into product creation. But I was pretty sure that's what I wanted to do. The reason I got the job was because I'd played the sport, so I understood the consumer. So earlier when I was saying that's the most important thing, like understand that was what got me the foot in the door. I knew what it was like to pull on a shirt and play, and the team that I was working for needed that insight. So and they taught me um, how to price an item and how to brief a product and um, everything else that comes with product creation was learned. So first thing, anybody can do it. Second thing, there's never been a better time than now to do it yourself. Um, 20 years ago, the barriers to entry of making your own product were really, really high. Like lots of stuff was made in the Far East, and uh, there's websites you can go to today and say, or agencies you can go to today that haven't already exist. You can find through social media now and say, I want to make a t-shirt for this brand, and you can pay somebody just to create the product for you. You just need to brief them and they'll do it for you. Not the best way to do it, but
Mm.
effectively what I'm saying is anyone can do it, and there's never been a better time. What that's led to is lots and lots of people trying to do it. I think there was a stat the other day of it's something like 600 new sportswear brands were started in I want to say it was the 2-year period during COVID.
Wow.
So I'm probably getting that stat wrong, but I remember being taken aback and thinking, my God, that's a lot of sportswear brands. And it was in a 2 or 3 year period. And I might get the timing wrong. Maybe it was after COVID, but it was a hell of a lot. And it was linked to the fact that those small brands were stealing market share from people like Adidas, Nike, etc. I mentioned Satisfy earlier. That's an example of small brands taking money away from the big guys. They used to compete for share, and now it's lots and lots of little brands taking them away. So when you ask me, like, what are the steps? Like, first thing, don't be afraid to try, because you definitely can. There's never been an easier time, and you don't need any professional training. You can work it all out now. This is the golden era. Like, everything's available on everything that I learned through 20 years in Nike and Gymshark combined is available online. Like I mean, or you can ask an AI bot to tell you how to. When I type stuff like in, I'm like, yeah, that's about right. I had a conversation yesterday while I was walking. This is mad, right? I was using the dictation. I was talking to ChatGPT about how to calculate sell through rate,
Yeah,
and
I've been there.
yeah. So I'm like, it described it to me. I was like, yeah, but that's not really the stat I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is more like inventory turnover time. And I'm just having a conversation with a robot, and it's right. And I'm like, this is staggering. Like, it knows exactly like how this works. So yeah, those are my first two set. The the bit of advice that I think is more specific to me is you need to spend quite a bit of time on like the story and the vision first, because it makes the decision making easier as you're going through it. Because the observation I've had since being effectively allowed to do whatever I want is you get a bit distracted by all the opportunities and the different things you could be doing.
Mm.
And I think that's probably like the downside of being able to do anything and it being easier than ever is there's infinite possibilities. And I think being able to like being constrained and coming back to like one particular vision or idea, one particular person, one muse or one particular mission, That's really important because it will make your decision making easier. When something comes your way, hey Matt, you should put numbers and crests on the front of your jersey. It's like, no, that's not who I am. It's a perfectly good, reasonable request, but I'm trying to get as tight as possible so I can say no to things. That's probably if I 1, 2, and 3. Start now. There's no reason why you shouldn't, and be really, really clear on what you want to do.
Yeah. That's actually that final piece is something that's really come through in this conversation because we've gone like women's rugby, cricket, putting numbers on the back and all these things. You said no,
Yeah,
that's
fair.
not me. It's not what I want to do.
Yeah,
So it's almost got to be like a stubbornness to it, a stubbornness to your own vision.
yeah. It's the thing that I'm realizing is like, um, I've worked in places where there's been very, very clear visions. And one of the things that I wish more people could see, and I feel really, really privileged to have experienced this, is in Nike World Headquarters, there is a creative direction for each season. And it's as you'd expect, that's not rocket science, but there's a physical space and an actual room you go into on a 6 monthly basis. You will go in and you'll walk through, and they have designers from the massive design team they have literally walk through the space with you and describe what's happening. And they've got, it's like an art gallery, but it's for where Nike's going. And it's one of those things like sign an NDA, put your phone down in the basket. You can't go through, no cameras, no nothing. It's like, and they take you through an experience. And I'm talking about sound is designed, lighting's designed, the sense in the room that you see physical garments, not just digital space, like digital screens. It's an experience that you walk through like a museum, and you come out going, okay, I know where we're going in the next 6 months. Now,
Wow.
like having seen that, and I didn't see that level of execution at Gymshark because Nike's. I think I'm right in saying that Nike has the largest design team of any company in the world.
Wow. Okay.
I think that's a stat. I'll have to fact check me on that one, but they do it really, really well. And you walk through that space, and having that sort of clarity of this is what it will look and feel like and smell like, that will make things easier when you're making decisions. And it's, I'm as I'm saying it out loud, it sounds like I'm good at that. I'm glad you said that. I sound like I'm stubborn because I sent you a picture of a hoodie that I knocked up the other day. There's me playing around, right? I was like, I happen to be doing a Photoshop course at the moment because I'm trying to like upskill myself with some of the time I've got. And I learned a few techniques. And I was like, oh, I could do this, this, and this. And I threw it on the out, and I'm looking at it and going, this is cool, but it's definitely not me. It's definitely
Yeah.
not the brand. So I've created something. It's led me down this like rabbit hole, and I've created something. And I go, well, that's cool, but that's not my brand.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't release that, even though I think a brand could. I shouldn't release that hoodie because that's not what I'm trying to do. So yeah, stubbornness or yeah, the flexing the muscle of being able to just say no is probably is a
Yeah. I
good
mean,
one.
that's what they say. Like knowing who you are is part of it, but the major part is knowing what you're definitely not. And it seems like you've
Yeah.
got that down to almost an art form. Um, so there's this podcast called By Design. Uh, from what you just described at Nike headquarters, they are living intentionally and by design to the extent that they're taking people through an immersive experience every 6 months. How would you say, are there any other experiences that you've had like that where you're like, this is a way to do this by design or live by design in your career? Is there anything that you're doing right now? Is there anything that comes to mind? That's quite a salient one, but is there anything else that you're doing to live by
These,
design?
I mean, I have to be really pragmatic. I don't have the resources that was lucky enough to be surrounded by in the past. But like, so pragmatic things like I'm now watching more rugby live at games or on TV than I have done in years because I just need to absorb as much as I possibly can. So when I mean, I hadn't been to a Newcastle game, Newcastle, formerly Falcons, now Red Bulls. I've been to 3 this year because I'm sitting watching the game, yeah, and I'm trying to familiarize myself with what's happening on the field and getting to see the opposition, but I'm just watching the crowd the whole time. Like, what are people actually wearing? The people that I'm supposed to be selling to are in this crowd, and what are they actually wearing? And let's try and design that. So that's a pragmatic one, but at At Gymshark, one of the first things we did, it was quite ironic. I'd lived in the US for 4 years. I moved back to the UK, and the first thing I did was fly to the US because it's the Gymshark's biggest audience. But and ironically, we went to Miami, which was Miami and Houston, and they were two of the cities that I visited the most because they both have NFL teams, and we had really good access to talk to their teams and players. So I just found it funny that I was traveling back to Houston and Miami. Anyway,
Yeah.
we went to gyms, and again, it's the same exercise of, if I'm making product for a gym brand, I need to go and be in the environment that these people are in and just watch. And I've still got the photos on my phone of those gyms in Houston, Austin, Miami that I was recording and observing what people were actually wearing and choosing to wear. And sometimes that's to replicate or duplicate what they're already choosing to wear, but also thinking like, what could they be doing next? One phrase I used to quite like was like, what's the look of lifting? And the look of lifting if I asked you right now, like, what's the look of, there's lots of meme pages now about the football look, right? That bloke core you referenced before, there's almost like levels of it, and there's different like nuances to bloke core. But there's definitely a look, right? You can probably imagine what that is, and probably engrave that in your head. Like I used to try and do that with lifting culture. And what emerged to me is there was actually different looks for different types of lifting. Like what people were wearing to build biceps and abs was very different from what people were wearing if they were a power lifter, where they didn't care if they were, and to Joe Blogs in the street, or like your average person doesn't see that and appreciate it. But if you're in those audiences, it's a litmus test. You can tell straight away if the brand gets you or not. Somebody once said to me, it's like if you did a photo shoot for a sprinter and that guy wasn't wearing spikes and was wearing trainers. Like the average like you're in the blocks and you're wearing trainers instead of spikes. There's no world where you wouldn't have spikes in blocks. Like you're always in spikes or in blocks. And if you get that wrong, people that are into track and field were like, this brand has no idea what they're doing. That doesn't work for me. The Gymshark equivalent was the types of plates that are used in a lifting environment. So power lifters, I've gone down a rabbit hole now. So, but for like power lifters use a different plate from what a CrossFitter would use, or what you might use in a commercial gym. So in commercial gyms, you might see the ones with they call them, I think they're revolver plates. So they've got like 6 holes in them, so you can grab them and hold them. Or they're usually rubber surrounded for durability, make them a bit easier to pick up and grab. But if you go into a powerlifting gym, because they're lifting a lot of weight and there's only so much space on the bar, they're pure iron, and they're calibrated and they're much thinner. So you can get lots of plates on there and they don't bounce, and you should never drop them. And if you're in those worlds, you know that. So if you do a photo shoot and you're talking to a CrossFitter, don't put iron plates on there, because they're like, I would never use those. And those are the sort of things that I think your brand lives and dies by. If you're faking it, your target consumer will see it and go, yeah, no, I'm out. That's not me. So you asked me about what are the things. I think going and observing the nature. Theoretically, anybody could go and do any. Like I could go start a women's sports bra brand by going and doing the work of observing and listening to the consumer and watching. It's probably not, if you're going to be the face of a brand or be publicly facing as like a founder, it probably won't work. But theoretically, I could be behind the scenes doing that. So that'd be my advice. Like go spend the time like really observing the details that matter to those people.
Yeah. I mean, as the founder of a rugby lifestyle brand, there's worse things to be doing than going down to watch the Red Bulls play. I need to go back up to the Northeast. We should catch a game at some point, or if you're ever down in London.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there anything you want to plug? What's next for Matt? What's next for Old Novo?
I'll tell you one thing that we didn't talk. You asked me earlier, like, what is there anything you want to talk about? A lot of what we've mentioned has been about linked directly to rugby. There is another space entirely, which one of my friends has put me onto, was the again the appropriation of rugby jerseys in hip hop and rap
Okay.
that I was oblivious to, which I've started like sort of researching and diving into. Um, I've done a couple of videos about this, but it's very, very deep. And I think there's a documentary about um, there were, I don't know if they were rival gangs. I'm going to butcher this now. Apologies. There were either rival gangs or they were just gangs in two different boroughs of New York. But their whole thing, they were like inner city um, youths that were going to department stores in the 90s, I think it was, and stealing high end merchandise.
Hmm.
And the items that were most sought after were like Ralph Lauren, Polo Sport, Tommy Hilfiger. And they were called, I think the two gangs ended up coming together and becoming called the Low Lives. So if you Google Low Lives gangs New York, it's a whole thing. There's Instagram handles about this journey and these people. And there's debate about who actually founded the Low Lives the first time, but there's no doubt that they were going into stores and stealing the product and showing it off like they bought it. And it was like this sort of like swag thing. It was, look at what we're wearing.
Hmm.
The reason that hip hop and rap artists were wearing those products online was to reference that crime and that gang culture that was happening. And that's how someone like Snoop Dogg was able to wear a Tommy Hilfiger rugby jersey on Saturday night, and it made sense. And it was like, he didn't go steal it. I mean, Tommy Hilfiger actually gave him the jersey to wear, but it felt authentic and felt real because he was a rapper and he was linked to crime in some sense in his former life. You know, it was, I think there's a whole world where preppy, high end rugby culture is still to be story told. And that really excites me. Like, I think that's where I think about young rugby players being like, why didn't nobody ever tell me about how cool rugby jerseys actually are? It's really similar to Carhartt. You probably like there was lots of hip hop and rap artists were wearing Carhartt jackets because they were spending time in the streets. So in the gangs were wearing these jackets because they were affordable, cheap, really warm, had lots of deep pockets, and they could hide stuff. And that became hip hop culture, which
Hmm.
became fashion. I think that's fascinating because rugby, of all things, has a link to that, and nobody's telling that story yet.
Yeah. So how would you go about telling that story? Because as much as hip hop and rap and music in general probably is at the kind of forefront of culture, if rugby is already infiltrated that side of culture, are you trying to like use that in your storytelling with Old Novo at all? Because it's kind of already happened, or is it more a case of looking forward to what other cultures are going to? I think appropriate in this case is the wrong word, but just take on a slightly like the rugby aesthetic
I
and
just don't know. I don't know why rugby brands aren't. Um, it's yeah. So ALD are referencing when they use a rugby jersey as a silhouette. They aren't referencing the sport of rugby or preppiness. They're referencing um, the that moment I just described around um, Ralph Lauren, Tommy Hilfiger, but also hip hop culture and skate. Like I think like a lot. There's just an it. What I want to say is it's not just a a a parallel between on field and off the field in rugby circles. There's another dimension to this where it's neither, and the silhouette is still there and still cool. But like Emily and Dor have rugby jerseys and have been doing them really, really well for a while now. That's got nothing to do with rugby players at all.
yeah,
I think that's my message. I think I wish that rugby players knew more about that and how cool rugby jerseys are to a completely different audience that have never watched a game.
yeah. So even though it's such an interesting dynamic because the people that
Yeah,
rugby jerseys should be for don't find rugby jerseys cool, but everyone else is finding them cool. Is that
yeah,
kind of like what you mean?
yeah.
So as much as it's about recapturing rugby from fashion, it's also make rugby jerseys cool again
Yeah,
to
yeah.
rugby players.
Yeah, or to make them realize like um, yeah, it's interesting, and there's also um, there's something about the rugby silhouette which is of this moment where you know when people went, I think this is common knowledge now, but during COVID, people stopped wearing more formal products and smart products. They were starting to wear more comfortable, like tracksuits, leggings, oversized products, just comfortable sweats to wear day to day because you weren't going to an office. And the athleisure style became much more prominent across the globe, the entirety of the globe, everywhere. Um, with that, I think there's an opportunity for people to be able to wear that things got too comfortable, too relaxed. And I think a nice step back towards being a little bit more formal is that collar. And I think like a long sleeve with a nice fit and a collar and a placket and buttons. It's smarter than a t-shirt, but not as stiff as an actual shirt. I think there's something there for it as well. If you take a step back from it, I don't care about rugby, I don't care about hip hop culture, but just as a silhouette to wear, the rugby shirt is a great silhouette for this time we're in, this era we're in right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird how the classic rugby aesthetic, the person who's like going to the pub or going to the stadium to watch rugby is usually like your jeans, like your brown shoes, and then some
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
like polo, not necessarily a rugby shirt, but some kind of polo or a shirt or something. But actually the older, more traditional rugby aesthetic is something which is fashionable and cool.
Funny, but yeah, so you can tell I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. But
Well, as you should, as I'd expect.
yeah.
This is what everything's going on. Um, So off the back of that, is there anything else that you'd want to plug or to note down? Where can people find you um, listening to this podcast?
So my website is oldnovo.com. Instagram is old.novo.com. Sorry, old.novo. But yeah, anybody wants to know anything about what I'm doing, you either find me on social media or subscribe at oldnovo.com. And whenever there's anything launching, the first people will find out about it is through subscribing. I'll send emails to people on oldnovo.com.
Awesome. Matt, thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Matt at Old Novo. I'm excited to see what happens going forward.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Love talking to you.
Awesome. Thanks, man.